My name is Kornel Kisielewicz. I'm the lead developer and designer and founder of Chaos Forge. Chaos Forge itself was a hobbyist project which started back in 2000 and became a commercial company developing indie games somewhere around 2016, I think. We are working on Jupiter Hell right now, which is currently in early access and is slated for full release on August the 5th if everything goes well.
How did you end up developing roguelikes as a hobbyist way back?
So it goes way back to my roots as a fan of pen and paper tabletop games. I really loved running like complex campaigns in pen and paper. I created my own world for my campaign, which was running around 7 or 8 years, I think. And the point was that I've been doing a lot of preparation preparation between sessions for being a game master. So I had all those detailed written up things about the world, the lore and everything. We used, by the way, GURPS as a role-playing system, which elements of are present both in Doom RL and Jupiter Hell, but you have to like dive deeply to find them. Anyway, I've been running those pen and paper sessions with a lot of preparation, and I realized that I'm doing like 12 up to 20 hours of preparation for something that runs for 5 hours, and then it's like only the 4 people that were attending actually will remember anything from it. And I really wanted to have, to be able to create worlds, create scenarios for more people than just 4 people. So that's when I turned to game development, especially that during that time I've downloaded, I think it was 1998 when it started, or 1997. I downloaded Angband, ADOM, and a couple of other those classic roguelikes from FTP servers in my father's workplace. So I got hooked on that, and I thought, like, hey, I know a little bit of programming. I think I could write one. Like, how hard can it be? Anyway, I really loved also the aspect of books, source books about RPG games, which to stimulate your imagination, they gave you random tables to build up a scenario, right? So I also was thinking out, if you could do something like that in a computer game and have like random scenarios that are actually procedurally generated. So if you go back, there was a news group in the Usenet days. There was a news group called Rec Games Roguelike Development, which was full of people which were developing the next big roguelike. And all of those roguelikes that they've developed were like massive, like Dwarf Fortress level. Everybody was obviously like at the beginning and only theorizing, but there were so many people that were trying to build like the bigger ADOM, the more randomly, the more procedural, the more, engaging roguelike. One of them was Tarn Adams, but come to think of it, he was the only one that actually made it, which is fun now that I think about it. I love Dwarf Fortress, I love reading about it, but I can't play it. I was also developing like one of those huge, very complex procedural, a world based on my RPG campaigns that would have, procedural everything and, would have stories and, this extreme detail. So I was like everybody else until a person came to the news group. I think her name was Amy Wang, started like bashing everybody that, everybody here is wasting time and nobody of you is going to ever finish a roguelike because you're totally, out of scope and everything. So everybody got really mad. And I was like, hell, I threw everything away and decided I'm going to make like a roguelike in 7 days, like a really simple one, like a rogue level of features just to prove that I can, right? That was the only reason to do it. So I made a simple generic fantasy dungeon crawler. I think I called it Downfall. It had like screen-sized levels. No saving was only possible on stairs. You would go down 20 levels. You had monsters, a very simple dungeon generation algorithm, limited inventory. Like everything was not the way I did it in my big roguelike. Everything was simplified to the max, right? Well, it was quote-unquote playable. There was nothing unique about it. It was quite streamlined compared to the how do you call them, the classic roguelikes. But I did it. I just, sent a link somewhere. It showed... Oh, I didn't even send it to anybody. I just left it on my hard drive and said like, okay, I did it. It works. Now back to my big, huge, magnum opus project. And there it was sitting on the hard drive until about a year later, I think it was 1999 or 2000 even, when sending emails with a friend of mine from the news group, Ilya Bieły, I hope I didn't butcher his name, we were suddenly like joking around about roguelikes inspired by movies or games or stuff like that. I always say that he was the first one that suggested Doom. He tells me that I was the one who suggested Doom, but nonetheless, what I did was take, as a joke, I took this old, roguelike that I wrote in 7 days, and I remade everything into, Doom names, staffs into shotguns, spells into rocket launchers, kobolds into imps. Basically did a reskin, did a little bit more work to make this thing a little bit more Doom-like, but there were still like gold coins lying around everywhere. And I sent it to him and said, look, it's a Doom roguelike. So he laughed, I laughed, and then I forgot about it and went back to writing my magnum opus. Another year goes by, or at least a couple of months, and he emails me and says, like, why didn't you release that? I'm like, come on, this was a joke. This isn't supposed to be a game. I was just making fun. And he's like, but people would actually play this joke. And I'm like, no way. There's no way I'm releasing that. But then he like convinced me, and I wrote a couple more features into it and released it as Doom RL, I think 0.70 or something like that, or 0.80. Doom the roguelike, right? And I didn't expect much of it. I thought that some people will have some laughs, and then 40, 50,000 downloads later and 2 mentions in, paper magazines. I'm like, what just happened? People are actually playing this. And that was a big surprise. That was a really unexpected. I did a couple of feature releases, and then I realized that people actually come for the joke but stay for the gameplay, which was a very weird realization. Like many people told me that the only reason they tried it out was because it had, it was making fun of the Doom brand, but the people that stayed, like played many hours. This all basically is like how Doom RL came to be and how the rest of my life, because what happened was I went to a gaming conference just out of curiosity, and then I've met the early indies. I'm talking about Derek Yu and his friends. I mean, all of this, big names right now that were doing those early roguelikes, and everybody told me like, you have to do this for a living. And I'm like, but this was a joke. But you have to do it for a living. So that's how it started.
Did you like ever have the kind of inkling that like there might be something here when you were working on it?
No, it was. I mean, before I released it, before I first saw how many people actually started playing that. Before that, my only motivation was it's a joke between friends.
Hi, I'm Mark Meer. You might remember me from the time I saved the galaxy by giving big heroic speeches to a plucky band of space heroes. Wasn't that fun? This time, I'm going balls deep in demonic carnage while putting a shotgun to the mouth of every motherfucking monster who crawls out of hell. Jupiter hell.
My first roguelike was Moria, and then this thing that was on Mac 2 called Dungeons of Doom, which apparently has a billion other games also called Dungeons of Doom, and seemingly very few people actually played it. Doom RL and ADOM was kind of the like stepping point for me where I got into roguelikes. For me, it was just kind of this, oh, hey, it's this spin-off fan game, which I think attracted it kind of its own unique audience. Like you had the roguelike audience that was attracted to it, plus the first-person shooter audience that was attracted to it. And then you went on to work on projects inspired by other IPs. So how did Aliens RL come about?
I'll just point out that many people told me that Doom RL was their first roguelike, and they actually moved on to, things like ADOM, DCSS, or stuff like that, which is really surprising to me. So that's where the idea of a gateway drug to roguelikes came from. And I thought I could do it even more, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that. So Aliens RL. Aliens RL is a contrary to Doom RL, Aliens RL and I should probably mention also Berserk RL and Diablo RL. Those three, all of them were projects that were actually designed. They weren't. They didn't come out of nowhere. They were made for the 7-day roguelike competition, something that started in the Usenet days on Rec Games roguelike development, when people actually noticed that limiting their time and trying to make something small actually produces games instead of those projects that never see daylight. So because I did Doom the roguelike, I decided that that's my shtick. I'm going to remake popular or less popular things into roguelikes. So that's where Diablo RL came from. And that's where Aliens RL came from. Although Aliens RL, despite popular belief, is not fully based on Aliens. Aliens is actually a secondary inspiration. I mean, the Aliens, the movie. The primary inspiration was Alien Breed Tower Assault, from which it takes the whole setup of having, several towers that you're actually trying to climb.
From the creator of Doom, the roguelike, comes a classic yet modern 90s flavored sci-fi roguelike. Jupiter Hell, Permadeath, coming to Kickstarter November 15th.
So you've been making these roguelike demakes of other IPs for a little bit now. Where did the idea to create a follow-up to Doom the roguelike come from?
So okay, during my major days when I was working on all of those roguelikes, I've been doing PhD studies in computer science. So I basically had quite a lot of free time. But the moment that I realized that, this will end at some point, I realized that I will have to get a job. I actually went to a corporate job for a year where I was extremely unhappy. So I decided that I kind of want to still do what I love, right? And find a way to actually make money on it and deliver people more games to play. So I realized the only possible way, because I tried donations for a time, but there were no way as successful as, for example, Dwarf Fortress, because the game is of a much smaller, let's say, scale, so it doesn't have that longevity for its players. So I decided, after also, being encouraged by Derek and a couple of other indies after my first GDC, to try to make a commercial game. And what other game could I make than one that I could leverage the existing audience of online games? It was pretty obvious I would do a roguelike. So that's where the early idea of Jupiter Hell was born.
I remember hearing rumblings about Jupiter Hell from Doom RL, because I was kind of out of the scene at that point. I was mostly just working night shift. And how did the Kickstarter go?
Well, I should mention first that the Kickstarter was being planned for around 3 to 4 years, because there was 3 to 4 years of development, mostly from my point full-time before that, where each year I thought that, next year I'll do the Kickstarter. And the sad thing is that when I started, planning for the Kickstarter was something that you would throw, you could throw a description with some MS Paint art of something that sounds cool and people would still back it, right? The moment when we launched with the Kickstarter was the moment when most people were already burned by several failed Kickstarters that just went silent after gathering money, or after a year of development when the developer actually realized that making computer games is hard. If we would launch the Kickstarter the moment I thought about it and say we're doing a spiritual sequel to Doom RL, here's some concept ideas, we probably would get more money than when we actually launched with things to show. But I digress. I still had to secure some initial investment for the Kickstarter, because otherwise we would not be able to produce any kind of art. And initially the game was supposed to be, for example, 2D pixel art, but then I realized that if I make a pixel art game and I ask money for it, how am I supposed to, tell people that they should buy it? Because, it's really hard to get a better pixel artist than Derek Yu. the one who made the sprites for Doom the Roguelike. So probably for my commercial game, I would have to get somebody who's worse at that. So I would be selling a game with worse art on a Kickstarter for people to be a paid game later, right? So I realized that this is not the way to go, and this is the only reason why Jupiter Hell is in 3D. It was supposed to be, you know, like Quake-free style 3D, so like really low poly, this retro thing. But the funny thing is, first, during those times, there wasn't such a, you know, big push for retro graphics. And the second reason was that making retro sprites instead of using, you know, a process called baking high poly meshes into low poly meshes. It's actually making this old style sprites is actually a little bit more complex. So somehow the game evolved from being a Quake-free style, you know, no shadows, no lightning, just, you know, really simple models thing into this like semi-realistic thing that we see today. And it was all by accident, and it all totally increased the development time spent, because that obviously also meant we would have to, you know, develop the engine better, because I assume that most people that are listening right now know that Jupiter Hell is built ground up on a custom engine. So we had to build all of this up for the Kickstarter, and we also knew that Kickstarter is no longer the, you know, easy money source it used to be. So we were pretty scared. We actually decreased the goal of the Kickstarter like 2 weeks before launching the Kickstarter. We were supposed to be asking for a little bit more, and we were running pretty scared, but luckily like the Doom RL community showed up day one, so we had a really brilliant day one. And afterwards we had some nice shout outs from some people, but basically then we had what people call like the desert. Once you usually have a big amount of backers week one, right? It goes really up, and then there's a drought and nothing happens till the last few days when, you know, people see that we're near the goal, so they start, you know, either upping their pledges, or people that are actually waiting for the Kickstarter to finish are you know, looking at it and seeing, oh yeah, it will probably make it, so here, I'll pledge. And the question is always that during the drought in the middle, are you high enough to actually finish? Well, some Kickstarters obviously reach their goal day 5 or week 1 or something like that. But in those cases where you have this, you know, middle point, is the question: are we high enough to finish, to you know, to have this last stretch be able to fund the project? And I realized like 10 days before, no. I realized like halfway that no, we're probably not going to make it. And that was very, very scary, because I've said everything I could. I showed everything I had. I was thinking like, you know, I would need a miracle for the game to actually, okay, I need something big to happen, and I have no idea what. So I'm sitting there at 2 a.m. in the morning drinking whiskey and thinking, what else can I sell? What can I do? What else can I do? And then I get an email. I'll smile, finish up my whiskey, and go to sleep, because I know the Kickstarter is already done. And that email was from the ZeniMax legal department, which was a takedown of the Doom the Roguelike website for using their IPs. What I did a screenshot of this email, I sent it out to Twitter, and I went to sleep. So the next day I wake up, and we have, like, when we launched the Kickstarter, we had coverage from Rock Paper Shotgun, and that's about it. That was the only big press site that actually wrote about us. But the next day after that CNT, we had coverage from Kotaku, Rock Paper Shotgun, PC Gamer, Polygon, everywhere. It was everywhere. Obviously, the coverage was about, you know, big bad ZeniMax trying to take down a 15-year-old fan game. But almost every article mentioned probably it's because they're actually, you know, kickstarting a spiritual successor. Link here. So the point was that obviously, you know, there were some, angry people that were like, I returned my pre-order for Doom and put $60 into it. There were a couple of those, but they were a negligible amount of people. But what it did, and what was more important, it actually allowed us to reach all of those Doom RL players that we couldn't otherwise reach because they didn't, read about Doom RL anymore. So most people that ever played Doom RL actually heard about the Kickstarter, and this was the best thing that came out of this. And 2 days, I immediately got asked what I'm planning to do, so I waited tactically for 48 hours without saying anything. Then I wrote, I aim to misbehave on Twitter. And what I did was follow their CND to the letter. I did everything they asked. I removed the trademarks from the website. There was nothing about the game itself. They asked me to remove the trademarks from the website. I removed the trademarks from the website, replaced them with DRL, and I open sourced the game. So basically, the game is out there. You can try to stop it right now, but it's open source, so somebody will always have a copy.
All of this together kind of felt like this massive influx of traffic and news coming from public media. However, I, as a fan, feel like it didn't quite push you guys into a big success. It was very much enough to give you a boost, and then at the end still just enough to get you past your goal, but not enough to make the Kickstarter explode into something massive. What do you think was the reasoning behind that? Like, why did it just succeed instead of soar?
Well, that's the point. We probably had the worst, because later people like this, because this was exactly the point where people were extremely burned by a lot of Kickstarters that didn't deliver. That was exactly the point when we were actually launching. So I think a year later, probably it would be a little bit better, because people, found because this was like a backlash from in the early days, like everybody funded everything, then everybody got burned, it went really, really much down, and later it kind of recovered, and people were like, okay, we're more cautious, but we'll once again trust a little bit in the projects, we'll just, keep a more careful eye on what we're actually trying to fund. But still, that wasn't. Funny thing is that wasn't actually meeting the goal. We at that point we were way closer. We were on that point where I thought, yeah, I think we will make it, but it was like not 100%. The articles didn't have that much of an effect. So there's another funny story. We were sitting with my brother, who helps me work on the game. We were sitting, it was exactly, it was like 50 hours before the end of the Kickstarter. And we usually, meet up from time to time to have a few drinks and talk about shit. And we were sitting there and thinking like, will we make it or not? There's so much more needed. But I remember that Kickstarter sometimes have this influx at the end, so will we make it or not? So we see, we had a live preview of when somebody is actually pledging. And at some point, there was a stupid idea made, like, yeah, let's have a sip for every donation. For every pledge made, right? So we have a sip, like 5 minutes later, there's another one, let's have a sip. And then 2 minutes later or something like that, we're still talking. And then what I didn't know before was that at the exactly 48-hour mark, Kickstarter sends everybody who said, I'm watching this project, an email that the project is about to end. And this was precisely the moment we were sitting there, and precisely 1 hour after we made that, joke about taking a sip. So all those emails got sent, and suddenly it's pledge, pause, pledge. Pledge. I wrote that on Twitter that we're taking a sip for every pledge. No, enough said that I don't much, and neither me nor my brother remember how that night ended, but I'm pretty sure we both were sleeping really well that night. We didn't reach the goal, but it was obvious that within the next 48 hours we will definitely make it. And we did, like with 7 hours to spare or something, and we still managed to beat the goal by 10,000 British pounds. I spent probably the next 3 or 4 months tearing down what I jury rigged for the Kickstarter demos, because to show as much possible features on the Kickstarter videos, we implemented some things like really haphazardly, really messy, and instead of building on that, I took like 3 or 4 months to tear it all down and re-implement it cleanly, which was a very, very good decision, because then when we launched in early access, we already had something that was stable. Like there's a saying that most people don't know about it, but most games that launch, even the AAA games, they are in a state of it will fall apart if we touch it. Basically, the last moment crunch often is a whole year or something like that. So people, just try to put in things just to meet the deadlines. And many games release in a state that that's why many games don't have like decent post-launch support, because basically this is something that falls apart so much that nobody wants to touch it anymore. It works, and that's good, and we'll fix the bugs and basically don't talk about it anymore. And unfortunately, many games in early access launch in that state. So that's one of the reasons why so many early access games actually don't see a full release, because they were haphazardly put together just to be playable. And when the programmers later see what they have to work with and realize that they would have to rewrite many systems again to implement the promised features, they realized how much time it is, and they say like, well, fuck it, I'm out of here.
Time to kick some demon ass. Welcome to Jupiter Hell. Available exclusively on the Epic Store. Just fucking kidding.
Something that I wanted to ask about before we get kind of into the development of Jupiter Hell itself is, how did you end up working with Mark Meer specifically?
I'm Mark Meer.
Yeah, this is totally by accident, because one of donators to Doom the Roguelike turned out to be an industry person. His name is Jason Kapalka, and he's probably known most for Bejeweled and Plants and Zombies, and selling his company to Electronic Arts for a lot of money. And he actually was the initial investor for our game. And turned out that he's also real life friends with Mark Meer, and he offered to hook us up with him to do the voiceover for reasonable indie rates. And because having anything that we can have that anything that we would have for the Kickstarter that would kind of ring a bell for a regular person, like having Commander Shepard be actually the voice actor for the protagonist, was a big win for us. So that's why we went with it. Initially, the protagonist was supposed to be a silent protagonist, like Gordon Freeman, and that kind of changed because we had the possibility of working with Mark Meer, and that was an awesome possibility. I'll tell you another funny thing is that the Epic Game Store line was actually not invented by me. It was recorded as a joke because Jason was overseeing Mark Meer's was overseeing him in the sound booth, and they recorded it without it being in the script. And afterwards, when I laughed about it really hard, because I was kind of vocal about Epic's Game Store on Twitter, and after I heard it, I was like, "Let's use this in the trailer." And Jason was like, "Well, come to think of it, okay."
It's just such a good line because I did actually have a couple people reach out to me going, "Oh, that's on the Epic Games Store." Like there was two people, and I very specifically remember I heard that was on the Epic Games Store. I'm like, "Did you actually like watch the trailer, or was that the exact time that you pressed pause?"
It's better.
Alongside of the Kickstarter, you promised, if I recall correctly, a Linux version, a Windows version, and a Mac version. So what exactly happened there?
So at the time when we were developing, the basics of the engine, we were running Windows, and quite quickly we were also running Linux. But at that point, the situation was that when you were writing something indie, something like ground up, not on an existing engine on Mac, you were using OpenGL. And OpenGL did have some problems with it. Like the newer versions of OpenGL weren't fully supported on Mac, but people assumed that they will finally, come and fix this, because this was obviously they needed some kind of a graphical API to be actually working if they were thinking about games at all. So during I think Kickstarter was before Metal was announced, but I'm not sure. Well, that doesn't really matter. Everybody assumed that OpenGL, is they're here to stay and everything will be all right. And then basically we promised the macOS version, and then basically what Apple said is, well, F you, all you people that use OpenGL, it's deprecated, we're not going to fix the bugs. So that was an extreme moment of panic for us, because, well, without OpenGL, we're not going to write a completely separate Metal API version of the renderer, because it would be a shitload of time and development costs, for which we basically, the Kickstarter was quite some time ago, and we obviously ran out of Kickstarter money later. At that time, we had to procure some additional development funding. And it was obvious that we cannot afford making a completely separate Mac port. There was like one company that was developing API that allowed to translate Vulkan directly into the Metal API of Mac. And we were eyeing Vulkan for some time, because Vulkan is a much cleaner and newer API for graphics cards, and was the shit at the time when it came out. And it was obvious that it would be supported a little bit longer, and more importantly, it turned out to be the native API used on a Nintendo Switch, which at some point we really want to do a port on Nintendo Switch. So we knew that at some point we would want to think about this Vulkan. However, we knew that we won't port Jupiter Hell to Vulkan, just because, well, it would mean a lot of development time and a lot of money, that we had to put into development that is not, going towards any features in the game. However, because of the Mac situation, it turned out that this was the only reasonable way to support Jupiter Hell on Mac, was actually make that Vulkan port and pray that it will work with the Molten VK on Macs. So we invested more than a man development year into it to make that Vulkan port. It cost us around, I think, somewhere around $120,000. Not only development time, but also costs and everything. And and the sad story is that we maybe made $10,000 in sales on the Mac up to date, after 1.5 years of being but still, promise was a promise, and we made good with that promise. However, the sad thing is that right now Apple has even more exciting ideas. Like, for example, they announced that they will be moving away from Intels for their processors. They do have a compatibility layer which seems to work, but we already have some bugs with Molten VK that on the new Macs the game has some visual problems that we cannot solve, because we don't have the new Macs at the office, and those things are extremely expensive. And the other thing is that Apple decided that at some point they will require everything that goes on, because there's a small loophole with Mac development on Steam, is that if you push a game to Steam on the Mac, you don't have to sign it, because Mac requires all applications to be signed. Signing isn't such a big issue, but we're happy that we don't have to do it. However, now they said that you will have to sign it, you will have to send it to them and sign it on their servers. Nobody knows how long it will take, but for a game that, pushes updates sometimes one a day when we do bug fixes, this is something ridiculous. And what's worse, they might someday decide, that games that use Molten VK instead of our superior Metal API are games that do not meet the quality standards of Apple, and they will be rejected by the signing process on their own servers. If they do that, we will stop supporting Jupyter Hell on Mac, period.
Something that really concerns me with as well is also right now Apple is currently suing Epic and is pulling Valve into that lawsuit, trying to get data from Valve and them launching all of their own, game stores. I'm waiting for them to just do or pull a Google Stadia and just kind of have a half-assed approach of running their own game store that is more than just their app store. I'm worried about all that. Apple scares me.
But I have to be honest towards all the players. If Apple pulls off something, stupid like that, we will stop supporting Jupyter Hell on Mac, because we already wasted a lot of money to make the Kickstarter promise, and we are in a much worse situation than like 99.99 indie games out there, because we are on a custom engine. Epic, for example, if you're using Unreal or Unity, it's Unity and Unreal that need to worry about all that shit. In our case, it's us that needs to be worrying about that shit. And we have a little less people working on the game than Unreal and Unity.
But you were able to get the game working on Mac and launch the game in August 2019 in early access, using the marketing term like chess with shotguns. I'm kind of curious, where did that term come from? Who came up with it?
So the problem was that anybody looking at any kind of trailers of Jupyter Hell was thinking twin-stick shooter. Due to the way that animation is done in the game, due to the fact that we want to be very responsive to player controls, when you play the game fast, it actually looks like a twin-stick shooter. And while this was a nice feature, it turned out to be the bane of our existence, because our target audience, people that like turn-based games, they were looking at it and thinking, oh, it's a twin-stick shooter. What do you mean it's turn-based? And because, turn-based right now in the minds of players is something like XCOM or like Civilization, where you, point the mouse, make a big movement, and then the enemy moves. This thing that is very, natural to us roguelike players is actually a very weird concept for a regular indie game player. The fact that you press a button, move one square, and then the enemies move, and not, do a more complex action, is weird for them, because, they're used to mouse controls with a much bigger turn than just, a single movement. So between that and the fact that we had those, really smooth animations, the game actually looks like a twin-stick shooter. So we were brainstorming a lot possible ideas. How can we, in a really short trailer, tell people that this is actually a turn-based game? And it was Jason's idea that he came up with the term like chess, but with shotguns, and I really really liked it.
It's interesting that you talk about the concept of an end turn button, because I remember, I think it was you and me and a few other people while I was playing Jupyter Hell once, were talking about John Wick Hex, which at the time I think had just been announced. And the initial pitch for that game was oh, it's a turn-based game where you play as John Wick. And I was just sitting there going I know they're not going to do it, but why don't they just make a John Wick roguelike? Why would that be so difficult? You could just do that. But instead, they have to give it an end turn button. They have to give it a timeline. And
I think it would work much better as a roguelike than what they did.
They could have done something really cool there.
The beauty of the turn-based nature of roguelikes, I mean, the beauty of this kind of system of turns is that if you, let's for a moment imagine that you're playing a game that plays like XCOM, but you control just a single character and you're walking around the map and trying to, do exploration. It just wouldn't work, right? It would be extremely annoying to... It's the same feeling like when in XCOM you're trying to find the last alien on the map, which isn't such an issue with the newer XCOM games, but was a big issue with the older ones. And you're basically, doing a whole turn and then end turn, a whole turn and then end turn, and you're like basically feeling that you're wasting a lot of time, and it completely goes against the exploration idea. So basically all those games are mission-based, and even if a game tries to do like a turn-based combat, it usually has real-time non-combat. Like for example, Fallout, right? You walk around the map as a real-time game, but when combat starts, then it suddenly switches to turn-based. So the beauty of the control system is that you have a single control system and it actually works for the whole game. Only problem is that if you do it, animated with graphics, you'll get a situation where either it will look silly because the characters move extremely fast, or it will be very annoying to go from one part of the map to another.
So, we've talked about kind of how it's difficult to explain to somebody the concept of a roguelike when all they're seeing is footage, because it's a very tactile kind of feel playing a roguelike. It always feels turn-based when you're playing it, but to a spectator it may not appear that way.
People come to your stream and ask, is it really turn-based, right?
Frequently, yes. I'll have people watching my streams and they'll just be like, is this actually turn-based? This doesn't look turn-based. Are you sure this is turn-based? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's... Hold on, I'll just get up and leave and the game won't move. It's definitely turn-based. What was the initial reception like of the original early access version?
When it comes to the trailer, there were so many people that basically dismissed it as another twin-stick shooter, despite the fact that we had, with big letters written turn-based, like chess with shotgun. Time moves only when you do, and things like that. People were still like, looks like an alien shooter clone. Like a cheap alien shooter clone. Yeah, here I have to do this disclaimer, the fact that we launched an early access not when we were ready, not when we wanted to. We launched an early access when we had to. Not only did we run out of money, we actually were already burning a lot of money that we don't own. So it was, we had to, it was either launch in early access or die, basically. So we did a launch in a pretty bare bones state. I mean, the mechanics, the basic mechanics were there. The basic idea was there. We were relatively bug free, which I'm really happy about, because we already knew after the Kickstarter that tearing down features that were haphazardly added last minute actually takes more time than implementing them. We actually had a very, very awesome feature at early access launch. We had save and load anytime.
The ability to save your game.
Yes, save on exit was immediately day one, which I'm really happy about, and I didn't know that I'm happy about it until today. However, the game was really lacking. I mean, the amount of content inside of it was extremely bare bones, and a lot of people that knew Doom the roguelike were like, why should I play this if this sucks compared to if it has less features, if it's obviously less developed and just more shiny than Doom the roguelike. And I totally understand that. Many others were like, yeah, I see which direction this is going. It's going to be better than Doom the roguelike. I'm in. And there was also the group of people that, how do you expect me to play a game if you didn't implement diagonals yet? which was like, the game is lacking a very important feature. The game doesn't have diagonal movement. Never was meant to have diagonal movement. At no point in the game's development were there diagonals, so I never removed anything. The game was designed ground up to be 4 cardinal directions. There were in the beginning, there were two main reasons for that. Well, myself as a roguelike player, I only reminded myself about diagonals when I saw a situation that I actually need to use that diagonal, and then I was because I didn't have a numpad on for a long time in my life due to using laptop. So I was searching, was it page up or home or end? Which of those buttons should I press? And often actually pressed the wrong button and went in a completely different direction. But I was at least knowledgeable about the fact that you can move diagonally. When I playtested Doom RL, I never playtested it with diagonals, but obviously I really suck at Doom RL, so that isn't surprising. And I had several bug reports during the years about the cave levels in Doom RL and that they're impassable. And those were always bug reports from people that didn't even know that you can move diagonally. So those were people that actually beat the game on easy and never even knew that you can move diagonally. And between the laptop situation, between the fact that I don't use diagonals myself, and between the fact that many people actually didn't notice that, and I heard from Thomas Biskup from Adam that they actually made actual tests with people sitting down and seeing whether they realized they can move diagonally or not in original Adam. So between all of that, I decided that to have the game approachable and to have the game better playable, we should definitely focus on making the game work with only 4 cardinal directions, so it's easier to grasp and have the tactics, in other places instead of the diagonal movement. The fact that it translated into a much better situation with controllers is a complete bonus that only came up at the moment when we decided to add controller support. It was never the original decision to make its cardinal only was never influenced by controllers or by console ports.
So up until this point, the only time engines has really come up has been kind of in a negative. What are some of the benefits of being able to be on your own code?
Before I talk about the benefits, let me just say that in 2021, nobody should attempt to write their own engine anymore.
Unless it's like a weird science project.
Unless you have a big budget that you can sustain yourself for the next couple of years, or you're doing a 2D game, maybe. This is always the wrong idea, or at least something that you should really research before, entering this on this dark path. When I started writing Jupiter Hell, the engines were either not free or really on a crappy level, so this wasn't even a question. And remember that the game was supposed to be 2D sprites, so this was also not a question to write our own code. And when we switched to 3D, it was supposed to be really easy 3D, so that was also never a question. So we never had the question whether to use an existing engine or not. However, I'm happy with the fact that I went this path. What I'm happy about is also that I will be able to use this engine to create further projects, and it will be a lot easier now that I've got all this code written. And but when it comes to benefits, there are some strictly technical benefits. You probably noticed the fact that we don't have any loading screens because they are not needed. There's not much things that need to be pre-calculated in the way we load data. We have full control over it, so we don't do spurious loading, so we can basically skip anything loading related. And the fact that the game, the lighting in the game, there's nothing pre-calculated about it. Everything is done live on the graphics card, which the benefits of that will be seen in the future mostly due to upcoming procedural destruction, which we hope to be able to squeeze in for 1.0. Okay, if you want to do procedural destruction in Unity or in Unreal, realistic lighting or procedural destruction, pick one. If you dive deeply into the source code, when you have access to Unity's source code, which you have to be huge to have, or deeply dive into Unreal, you can probably pull it off, but otherwise it's pick one, either realistic lighting and shadows or procedural destruction, and we intend to have both. The other thing is that from a technical point of view, the game is 320,000 lines of C++ code, which compiles in 1 minute. In 1 minute from the source code, we have a fully functioning game, which probably will surprise any C++ programmers out there. But it's a benefit of the fact how we've written the game. And the other thing is that from the moment that I pull out the game from GitHub, I do a few changes, and within 10 minutes or up to 15 minutes, I've got a working build on Steam. And most of that time is Steam's servers trying to eat it, and half of the time is actually being built on a cloud system on all 3 platforms. So I know that some engines, their build times are sometimes completely ridiculous if you want to build from scratch, so this is also a benefit. But probably the main benefit is being able to do dynamic lighting for up to 32 lights, I think, on screen at the same time, each of them casting shadows, and do not do any pre-calculation, so we can still have, things fall apart, doors opening, interacting with the light, the characters interacting with the light, and hopefully at some point the destructible walls, interacting also with the light.
So something that's very difficult in roguelikes, aside from just playing them, is balancing them, because everything is, randomly laid out. There's a lot of variety from run to run. A lot of different things can cause situations that feel unfair. When you're working on Jupiter Hell and trying to balance this, how do you balance difficulty and fun?
There's one big important thing. What is fun for a beginner player, for a casual player, is not the same thing that is fun for a player that invested like hundreds of hours into the game. I'll give an example. If you play a game that's even a roguelite, if you play a game that basically has repeated runs, if on the run you gain something completely overpowered as a casual player, or get screwed over by RNG, even sometimes, you feel like, okay, this is fun, some exciting thing happened, I didn't expect this, and either, oh, the game was so easy after I found artifact X, and I was steamrolling, it was extremely fun. However, the same thing is not fun for somebody who, is beating the game for challenges, for, trying to get a perfect score, because for him, all the big outliers in the RNG, the things that are really fun for a casual player, at this point are like, okay, I have to restart again because I didn't get artifact X or any other useful thing from level 3. And this is irritating because this should be guaranteed. Like, for example, blue armor should be guaranteed by Europa, otherwise the run is completely wasted. Right? I mean, this is like an example completely off the rails, but I mean that players that play the game more dedicated and have hundreds of hours invested, they have the situation that if the RNG screws them really badly over, they have to restart and are basically consider it unfun, right? It's unfun because I didn't get any. I was playing Angel of Berserk and I didn't get any decent, advanced melee weapon drop up till level X. That means that the game is ruined. However, if you balance towards those players, the game stops being fun for people that consider fun to be, those outliers. I started to solve this and intend to push this idea even more that, outlying elements are being severely restricted on higher difficulty modes. So basically the outlying things that can happen should more often happen on easy modes like easy medium, and less on hard and even less on ultra-violence. And on Nightmare, it could be even very... So for example, when we are going at some point to implement unique weapons by design really impact the gameplay once you find them. And to make everybody happy, what I'll probably do is that on Ultraviolence and Nightmare, the unique drops, not only will they be strictly controlled in their amount, but they will also be like, if you want this kind of unique drop, you go to this place, and this unique drop will be controlled from a pool of drops that you know what kinds of there are. While in easy, medium, and up to a point on hard, that random drop might happen somewhere else. It might be from a bigger pool. It might be completely random. Because, otherwise you can't make everybody happy. But what you can do is try to tailor what kind of difficulty mode they're playing to the experience that they're going to get. One of my problems with developing this game is that I suck at it. I probably wouldn't suck as much with it were it for the fact that I'm constantly testing it on high speeds with, God mode on and everything. So when I try to play it normally, I basically fail because I have too fast reaction times to stuff that's on the screen. The balancing itself is mostly... I have to give a big shout out here to the Jupiter Hell Discord channel and our testers on the channel, because they've been providing a ton of feedback on tons of different difficulty levels, and without that feedback I couldn't possibly imagine to balance that game in a sensible manner, because I'll never know, for example, what the issues are when playing on Nightmare, because there's no realistic way for me to play on Nightmare, and all I can do is guessing and then throwing it on to people that actually beat Nightmare and hear their feedback. Obviously, I don't take all feedback at face value. I try to listen to many people and see where the real issues are, because there's a funny thing about player feedback. Players are the best source of telling you where there is a problem, but often not the best source of telling you how to solve that problem. So what I'm trying to do is gather, those points of contest, see what people are angry about, and think what's the real underlying reason of them being annoyed by that feature. Like the best example is people asking that they need a key for multi-weight. And I'm asking, why do you need a key for multi-weight? They want to have a key that they press and he does 50 weight actions unless something appears. And I'm and I had a few people tell me that in the beginning of development. And I'm like, why? I don't think this is a feature that fits the game, right? And they're like, because otherwise it's very boring, because I'm standing there and pressing this button for 50 times. Why are you pressing the button for 50 times? Oh, because, the most optimal way to fight the monsters is you stand behind cover and wait 50 turns, and they come to you, and then you're behind cover, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's actually the optimal way to play it. And then, okay, so this is an issue, so how do I solve it? Obviously not by adding a button to wait 50 turns. The issue should be solved by, making the game in a way that this tactic is not the best approach. So what I did, for example, is that when enemies spawn, they don't randomly walk around the whole map, they have their patrol zones. So if you're standing in a place, those guys from the other side of the map, they will never come to you because they have their own patrol zones. And there are several situations like that when players suggest a feature because it fits the playstyle, which is the optimal playstyle, and then you actually realize that the optimal playstyle is not what you want to achieve.
At that point, you have to change the meta, throw a wrench into things, break the pattern, and then everybody gets mad for a minute.
Sometimes they do get mad, but in the long run, I noticed that especially the core audience that we have on Discord, like the players that actually invest hundreds of hours in that, they usually are pretty forgiving when they see that, and usually say yeah, this actually worked out in the long run much better.
I seem to remember a big update on the AI from you guys at one point, which made me really happy, because it's oh hey, these are way more fun to fight now.
Yeah, but in the beginning it became much more harder, so we had to tone down the difficulty of the game itself after I implemented, smart soldiers that actually, hide behind cover. For easy, we reduced the penalties for the player shooting at stuff behind cover, because, on easy people would get mad that they're shooting at this guy 20 times and they don't hit him, and the guy is obviously behind cover, and So you have to learn those things to actually enjoy the game fully, and I think we need better tutorials for that too.
Almost 2 years now, year and a half of time in early access. You guys got really busy adding a lot of features.
The game changed completely.
So that kind of brings us up to the point where, well, you've announced a launch date and a partnership with a publisher. And as an indie game developer, how does that impact development going forward?
So let me be frank here. For the whole time, for the whole 9 years or almost 10 years of development of Jupiter Hell, I was pretty sure I don't want to go with a publisher. At some point I started searching for one, but it was mostly money related. Because we didn't have. It was the situation before early access, where we realized we don't have enough money to finish the game and get it to early access. So I was also searching for publishers. I heard their terms. I was scared about how much control I would lose, how much publishers basically work. That for them it's the launch day, and after that you're on your own. Basically, if you intend to develop the game further, we're just going to take our cut and do nothing. So. That was pretty scary for me. Also, the fact that if your 1.0 or early access launch fails, you're on your own. Basically, we're not going to help you out anymore. So all of this was extremely scary, and I kind of backed out of it and found some alternative ways to get funding to get to early access. And at this point, I decided, hey, I'm in early access. We kind of are surviving, although by the edge of our teeth, and I can probably, pull it towards 1.0. And, well, that was how it's supposed to be, but then a friend of mine, whom I've knew since the old Usenet days, from times of the news groups, actually the Polish news group PL Reg Gry Komputerowe Roguelike, where we were, discussing in 2000s, discussing the earlier roguelikes and stuff. And there was a person who knew me from back then and was a fan of Doom RL, and during the years did many things like from the shadows to help us out, like because he went into marketing and PR, so he actually used the connections of his own company to help us out with promoting the Kickstarter, promoting the early access launch. And turned out he's now working for Hyperstrange. Actually, he's got shares in there, so he's deeply invested. And he offered me like, hey, we're going to help you out. We'll publish you. And I'm like, I'm not going with a publisher. There's no way. And then he started to tell me what they would actually do. And when I heard that, I realized that those are all things that I should be doing to launch the game. And I should be doing them myself. And I have currently, really, I thought I know something about how to market an indie game, but I realized that many people that I know that are doing that are actually failing. And then I realized that, I will need help anyway. And to have help, I would need to hire somebody. And I don't even have money to hire somebody because we're so much, at the edge of our budget. And there's no way I can do a successful 1.0 launch. And also, they gave us very favorable terms, especially considering to the other publishers I talked about. And most importantly, they are focused on the long tail. They're focused on long-term support, because I told them I don't want to just do 1.0 and afterwards say it's done and move to something else. I actually want to do constant updates. I'm not even talking about doing paid DLCs, because I definitely don't want to go the Paradox model where you DLC every single hat or or everything. We definitely want to go, if we are going to do paid DLCs, it will be more like, a Diablo 2 expansion, which basically, is a significant change to the game, but you can also play it without the expansion, and people without the expansion will still get a significant update. But I still want to, there are so many things I want to do in Jupiter Hell that I know that I won't be able to do before 1.0, and I still want to have time to actually implement those things. So having a publisher that is targeting the long tail, he's actually thinking about long-term strategy instead of, just publish and forget, which basically 95% of the publishers out there, indie publishers out there, are looking at, was a moment that, between that I really wanted some help, and they really offered a lot of good things, like with stuff that, I didn't even have time to think about localization for the game, and this is something that we definitely want. So between all those things, it was like, the tipping point obviously was the fact that I trust the guy. And if you trust your publisher, a gigantic difference. Because there are so many stories of people being screwed over by their publishers that you wouldn't believe.
So now that we're kind of, I guess, in the final stretch before launch itself, I mean, as just a user on Steam, I've already kind of noticed a difference in Steam's algorithms, because that's what Steam is becoming now. It's starting to feel like YouTube, where like it just recommends stuff to you.
I already see the numbers change, I can tell you that. Like magically.
After launch is over, assuming you hit that August 5th window, what's next?
Okay, so first of all, there's a list of features that I really want to push in before 1.0, and all of those that don't make it before 1.0 will probably be in the first major update or second major update, depending on the size of the thing. And there's also a list of features that I realized there's like slim chances or zero chances to actually push before an August date. And those also are going to appear post 1.0. So like from the sad things that we had to push over the 1.0 deadline, or definitely probably procedural destruction will have to be pushed forward, although I'm still fighting to bring that within the August date, but like, don't keep your hopes up. This will probably be post 1.0. And the other big thing is to, have a female protagonist, which I really wanted to do. But between a full set of animation, full set of armors, full set of textures for that, because I don't want, anyone to voice the female protagonist. We really want to try to get somebody, at least at the scale of Mark Meer to voice the. Well, it would be great to have femshep for the female protagonist, for example, but this is also something that's going to be in a post 1.0 update. The first year of updates will be totally free, that's for sure, and possibly even the second. If we do an expansion, it will be something like really, really big. Not, just, let's say another class. It will be basically another full path for the game with new enemies, new level designs, big expansion of the plot and stuff like that.
It'll be the Lord of Destruction.
Exactly, the Lord of Destruction levels of expansions and a new class.
So do you have any ports to other platforms planned? I mean, I know it runs in Vulkan, so you could just like put it up on Stadia overnight if you really wanted to.
This is probably the least financially viable port, but on the other hand, it's the cheapest one. So, if the possibility shows itself, we probably will port it to Stadia, but I don't think we'll have much players there.
I mean, you'd be right next to your brother, and actual Doom is on Stadia.
It's on Stadia for the same reasons. It was also really easy to port from Vulkan to Stadia.
Yeah, I remember them saying that they had it up and running in like 3 weeks or something.
I'm pretty sure I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think Doom is available natively on Linux. But I'm pretty sure it does run inside on Linux without problems. So 3 weeks is totally realistic, I think, for a port for Doom.
So are there any plans for anything like Switch in the future, or console ports, or are we just staying on PC?
We wanted to, because
going forward,
since it turned out that the game plays really nicely on a gamepad, it was pretty obvious we were going to. Because earlier I wasn't sure about console ports, but the main reason was, can we make this play reasonably on a gamepad? And it turned out that it plays much better than I expected it to play. I know that some people, like some old school roguelike people who are used to playing on the keyboard, are specifically switching to the gamepad for this game only, which makes me kind of happy thinking about console ports. So now that we know that, it's pretty obvious that unless it's a financial flop, we will be investing money into porting it everywhere that we can. The initial plan was, before we signed up with the publisher, we thought that we would have way more time and before the 1.0, and we wanted to start to and possibly release it on Xbox, because that's currently the only console that we have dev kits for. And this is a kind of shout out to Microsoft, which basically, if you're an indie and you show them that you're actually working on a sensible game, they'll just send you free development kits, which is totally awesome from Microsoft points of view. And this is the only company that does such a thing out of the big three.
I would love to see the game make its way to consoles, and I know that I think kind of, at least for me, most of the people watching this are probably PC users because my YouTube channel is pretty Dwarf Fortress centric, and last I checked, the Android port of DF is pretty far off.
Don't you guys have phones?
Right. So I don't see that happening. That being said, I would like to play Jupiter Hell on a phone, though. I would do that.
It would definitely not be the same game, though.
Now that you have a fully developed engine and a soon-to-be finished game, what game you working on next with Chaos Forge?
The real secrets begin now, right? Okay, so it's not actually big secret that I want to do something with Balence RL. It's definitely not going to be just, continuing on the same code base. The Balence RL as it is will probably stay the same, but what I would want to do is, basically do the Jupiter Hell treatment, give the Jupiter Hell treatment to Balence RL and do something, a spiritual successor that is, true to the gameplay style of Balence RL, which is very different than the gameplay style of Doom RL or Jupiter Hell. Initially, Jupiter Hell was supposed to be a merge of some ideas between Doom RL and Balence RL. During the development, we changed some ideas. We planned, for example, to have returnable levels, hubs instead of like each moon will be interconnected. You could go back to levels and go to a different branch and stuff like that. But we realized that would destroy the tempo of the game without giving enough benefits. Like, this is a game about going forward, not backtracking. It doesn't fit the Doom RL-ish style. While it does fit a game in the style of Aliens, where you have respawning enemies, where the amount of enemies is infinite and your ammo is finite, right? In this case, backtracking makes a lot of more sense. So from the Balence RL game, like the only thing that went through probably, except minor things like multi-kits, are the terminals, the fact that you can do something with those terminals, and the restricted amount of weapons that you can carry with yourself in the single armor slot, right? That came from Balence RL, but the whole feeling of the game came from Doom RL. So what I would want to do is actually create Balence RL spiritual successor. And the other thing that I've been playing around is making a dark fantasy game in the style of Jupiter Hell, but fantasy, with focused on short runs into dungeons with a kind of overarching hub idea, where you could jump into the game, do like a 30-minute run of a dungeon, possibly die, but still have I wouldn't say a permanent progression. I would say it's like permanent unlocks of places that you can go with a character. But that's still a concept that I have somewhere in the back of my head. I don't know when I will realize that.
Almost like a Sproggy Wood type thing, where you have like your town that you return to, which doesn't really affect the dungeons themselves, but
yeah, possibly that direction.
Well, I mean, this has been fantastic. It's probably going to end up turning into Jupiter Hell the movie by the time I'm done cutting all of this together. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and record all of this so I can make something out of it. Hopefully it ends up being watchable by the time I'm done with it. But if you have any final thoughts or people you'd like to shout out, or especially tell people where they can go buy Jupiter Hell and find your other games, you can do that now.
You can buy the game currently on Steam and GOG, or you can buy a Steam key on Humble. If you really want to help us out, the best way is probably to buy on Steam and give us a positive review, because indie games live and die by their reviews. I really wanted to, take a moment and actually give a shout out, which I'm surprised that I'm doing that, but I'm going to give a shout out to my publisher, to Hyperstrange, because, we're almost a week from officially announcing that, and I must say, as I said before, I'm already seeing the numbers change. I'm already seeing the benefits, and I'm already feeling that there's a big weight out of my shoulders, and now I can focus exactly on what I do best. It's basically writing the game instead of worrying about marketing and stuff. And I have to give a big shout out to our Discord, and I hope you attach the link below. We have a great community of people which have direct influence of the game. There are several things that all the features that I add are first tested in our tester channel on Discord. The tester channel is actually open. You can read it, but if you want access to the test versions, which are like sometimes every couple of days even, you can just ask to be added to the group, and you'll get the password for the Steam beta releases. And without those testers, probably balancing would be way harder. So if you want to have a direct influence on the game, be sure to join our Discord. Be be active on the tester channel. And obviously a big shout out to people working with me on Jupiter Hell right now, especially to my artist Łukasz Śliwiński, who's basically did all the art that you see. Everything, every pixel, every icon, everything, every media on the page, every trailer is all done by a single person. Without him, I'll give you one quote. When I was in the beginning, when I was still doing it completely alone, and I was trying to get the game to Kickstarter, I met with Derek Yu, the artist who made the Dumarel sprites and big time indie, and he told me that my problem is that I need an artist that's basically my compatriot, my second half. That I laughed at it, that it sounds like this Star Wars quote, as always two there are, a master and an apprentice, and always two there are, an artist and a programmer. And he kind of had, he was right, because since I started working with Łukasz Śliwiński, then the game actually picked up. It's a titanic work both from him and from me. Okay, recording is rolling. I don't think that he has any issues with the fact that this will be a really long recording, right?
No issues there.
I never used Audacity for recording a really long
thing. It actually
so.
should have a thing down at the bottom that says how much hard drive space you have remaining, so we have 11,000 hours here, so we should be good, on my end at least.
Ooh, on my end I've got only 54, but I think it's running on the SSD.
I don't think it'll take us 2.5 days.
I don't think it will take us 2.5 days. That history is not that long. Okay. So, ready when you are.
Yeah, I'm pretty much good to go. So, can you introduce yourself?